Good morning, everybody, and welcome to MC Webinars. It's great to have you with us. Thank you for joining us this morning. As you know, we're going to be talking about a practical application for using labour market data when we want to understand the impact of COVID-19. We're really excited. We've got William Cookson with us, who is our Director of Economic Development here at MZ, and also Martin Gerard, who is the Account Director at MZ as well. So we do have the facility to ask questions. In your control panel, there is a questions box. So if you put any questions you have in that box, and then we can get to those, and I'll bring those up at the end of the presentation. If we don't get a chance to speak to you or answer your question, then we can follow up afterwards. So without any further ado, I hand over to you. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning, Debbie. Yes, welcome all. Obviously, it's a follow-up really on the last webinar that we did back on the 2nd of April, which seems like an age ago. We've got quite a lot to get through. So firstly, do be aware that we're going to share the slides. There's probably some other content that we'll share to anyone that's registered or attended the webinar. So yes, we're going to go at quite a pace. So obviously we can go through the agenda. So we're going to introduce ourselves, go through the goals for this session. We're going to look at what's available in terms of COVID-19 insight, in terms of labour market information, both from MZ and from external sources as well. We're going to spend the most of our time actually looking through 3 key workflows within the Analyst tool, looking at job posting analytics, how to identify compatible occupations by skills and experience and knowledge, and also look at our input and output model and how that can be used to inform scenario planning. And then we'll spend a bit of time looking at where you can find out more information and what else we have available at present. I'm hoping that most of you know us, but for those of you that don't, just key to say really, our mission is to help people make better informed decisions through providing a really solid labour market evidence base. We work across a wide range of organisations, but in the fields of skills, employment, and economic development. So the goals for this session: 3 key objectives. We're going to look at the latest insight. What can we share that's new in terms of labour market data that we think is useful? We're going to look at those workflows that I've mentioned already through the Analyst tool. And then we're going to point you towards further resources. So what's currently available? I thought it'd be useful to start with looking at what can be found through ONS data. Obviously, as you'd imagine, a lot of this is very time sensitive. So the special fortnightly business impact and coronavirus survey, that looks at turnover, workforce prices and trade. The really useful but very high level, so it's small and indicative, so there's no regional or industry breakdowns. There's hard data available on regional industry jobs, but that won't be available until September 2020 through workforce, and that will be for workforce jobs from Q2 or October 2020, and that will be the annual population survey for Q2. So it's only when we've got that Q2 data available through ONS that we'll have that insight, and obviously you can see there's a time lag there that we need to take account of. One of the most important data sets will be the claimant count data, so that will be unemployment data that's coming from DWP. That won't be out until the 19th of May for the month up until the 9th of April. So the claimant count data that we'll get at the end of, or that we'll get for this month, will actually be for the period before lockdown. And so it won't really show us what we need to see. Obviously, 19th of May, we'll have the first indication of local occupation effects, although that won't be a complete picture. we think that will be really useful to enhance what we're already able to see through job postings data. Can we go to the next slide? I want to just a quick run through what we have. Job postings have been really useful for this initial phase and understanding the impact on recruitment activity. Really useful as it's updated daily. We've used it in our national COVID-19 dashboard, which is on our website. We feel that's going to give us the best indication until we start to see those unemployment figures, which will be available in later May. But also we think it's going to continue to be useful. The thing that we're considering at the moment is what else we can do, and also we're looking at the frequency with which we look at job postings, and we're starting to move from that daily focus to potentially weekly or monthly, and monthly is obviously useful because that will align with unemployment figures. Obviously, there are challenges with job postings. We've talked about a lot about this in the past. They are noisy. There will still be job postings that are out there. Whether that actually reflects in jobs and recruitment is questionable. Obviously, small changes in posting practices can create weird effects. The other thing that's worth mentioning is on the positive side of job postings, nothing else has that occupation-rich detail. Obviously, they're local, where the geography is specified, and until we have that claimant count data, it's really hard to be able to understand the impact of the coronavirus without looking at job postings. Obviously, there'll be direct demand side data in late September in terms of workforce jobs, but we've got a while to wait for that. I just quickly wanted to mention this because it has come up in conversations with customers. At MC, we make projections rather than forecasts. So we look back over the last 3, 5, and 8 years. Obviously, this is an unforeseen disruption that whether you go down the road of making projections or forecasts, you wouldn't have predicted this. So the thing that we want to mention really is existing labour market information data, historical data, is still valuable as a baseline. And because there's a high degree of path dependency on local economies. So obviously, one of the ways we can look at this is that the lockdown has particularly impacted on certain sectors. If we think of pubs, cafes and restaurants, they've essentially been closed down or shut down. And the challenge there is we don't know exactly what's going to reappear when the lockdown measures are eased. Saying that, there are other sectors and industries where actually we think that they probably will reappear at pace. We'll come back to that. The input-output model, we'll talk about that as we go into the Analyst tool. It allows you to run scenarios to look at impact and see potentially what impact the decline could have in different industries. And in our consulting work, we're looking to bring a whole range of measures to focus, but essentially what we're trying to explore is obviously the analysis in regards to the exposure to coronavirus impacts at a local level. Okay, I thought it would be useful to share this. This is, again, free and openly available. So this is from the Office for Budgetary Responsibilities. This is from the Coronavirus Reference Scenario Commentary. It's published on the 14th of April. What they've done is they've estimated the share of output that would be lost in each industry in the second quarter of 2020. So they have basically created a model that estimates the shares of key workers, those able to work from home in each industry, with further adjustments for childcare responsibilities, absences due to illness, and those output losses are partly offset by increase in output in a few industries. So obviously we know that healthcare providers and food retailers have increased, but then we can also see if we look at accommodation and food services halfway down there, that's decreased significantly. This is a broad brush model. It will be updated and revised. So it's assuming that the effect on output reduces proportionally as restrictions are eased. So essentially it's assuming that recovery will happen relatively quickly. And they've assumed that the impact is halved in the third quarter and activity returns to pre-outbreak levels in the fourth quarter. So this is quite an optimistic view. But the scenario assumes that it's not necessary to reimpose the restrictions to deal with a new outbreak in autumn or winter. They are assuming some longer term economic scarring, and that's possible. But it's a model, it's out there, and it is useful in regards to informing your thinking. I also wanted to, the other thing I wanted to share, if we go to the next slide, again from the Office of Budgetary Restrictions. Here we're looking at their forecasts in regards to unemployment and the scenario there, and you can see huge spike going up through Q2 and then that decline. So even with that spike, I mean, that spike, it's worth mentioning, is 1.5 times the increase that we've seen in the past 3 recessions. Obviously, it could be more, as we don't know what extent furloughing will save jobs and how many businesses will be taken under by other expenditure that aren't related to staffing costs. So it's a slightly conservative view, and it assumes that it'll be back to normal after lockdown, and that output loss won't translate to job loss. But I thought that was useful to share. Do have a look at the website. There's a lot more insight within that report. Next slide, please. Yes. Just briefly, in terms of our consulting offering, when we're looking at the economic impact of the crisis, we've kind of split this out into short, medium term and long term analysis. Under short, medium term, obviously looking at the level of local exposure, benchmarking that to other areas by industry or sector. Breakdown by industry into different impact categories. There's a lot more I could talk about that, but I'm not going to now due to time. And the analysis of the potential risk to jobs and earnings within the regional economy under different scenarios, and to understand different forms of exposure. And then obviously, as we move into the medium term, identifying priorities for action on economic recovery, and also looking at skills supply and demand, identifying redeployment routes, which we'll come back to when we look at our Analyst tool as well. And then in the long term, through our discussions with LEP customers, obviously there's the need to reposition local industrial strategies, identifying risks and opportunities in the post-crisis world. Yes, so moving on, Martin. Okay, this is going to be the fun bit. So we're going to now seamlessly move across to our Analyst tool. I should keep talking, shouldn't I, while we do this seamless? Oh, that's pretty smooth. So it's a landing page for our Analyst tool. We're going to look at three or four things. We're going to look at job postings. We're going to have a look at claimant counts and where you can see those, just in anticipation of those being released in May. Then we're also going to look at compatible occupations, and we're going to have a little play with the input-output scenarios, looking at the potential impact on a particular industry. So if we start with looking at our job postings report, obviously, if you're an existing Analyst customer, which many of you will be, this will all be very familiar. For those that are new, this is one of our standard job posting analytics reports. On the right-hand side, in the middle there, you have headline measures. Just to state, you have total postings and unique postings. Unique postings are the ones that have been deduplicated. So that's where we know that it is a singular job posting. The posting intensity that we're looking at there, essentially is looking at how far and wide those jobs have been advertised. And obviously, we're looking at that in aggregate. So those jobs, one job posting has been put on 4 sites. The regional average there is 5 sites to 1 job advert. And then we've got the median posting duration, which is a useful measure in normal times for understanding how quickly an employer is able to recruit. So if we go, yes, worth mentioning, on the left-hand side, what we've done is we've identified 2 4-digit occupations. We focused in on kitchen and catering assistants and bar staff. Now, we have just released a report which I'll share with anyone that attends the webinar, or essentially the report is looking at the potential effects of the crisis on shutting down restaurants, cafes and pubs. So we thought we'd stick with those occupations for our analysis today. In terms of the geography, we're looking at United Kingdom. And then as we go down, you'll be able to see how those jobs are distributed. And then we can come to looking at the last month. And we can also look at the last 30 days. Obviously, this has been really useful. And obviously, this is compared with the light blue line, which is 2019. So we've seen a 50% drop, if I'm reading that correctly. I think when we looked at our job postings today, I think we're basically, I think it's overall, it's a 3rd down since the 7th of March in terms of job postings, which is really significant. And probably not that surprising if you've been looking at our national dashboard, where you can see that those that recruitment activity and those job postings just continue to drop. So Martin, is there anything else we should be looking at in terms of job postings? Obviously, if we scroll down, we can see who's hiring, can't we?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the trends, the tabs for monthly and last 30 days give you an idea as to what those trends are. Then as part of the job postings report, you've got other indicators around, which companies are actually hiring and to what volumes. The fine tune around the actual cities, the job titles associated with those SOC codes. You've got more detail as to the job titles there. And also, importantly, the in-demand skills. So what are the skills that employers are looking for those particular occupations? But both in terms of the job postings on the left-hand side and the frequency in workforce profiles. Hard skills and common skills as well. So just to break down the table there. Plus some information on posting sources, but that's basically a summary and overview of the kind of things that are possible. And in terms of recent developments, the ability to look at the last 30 days there is something that we've recently added into the Analyst tool.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so we've had a look at the job postings. Where will we be able to look at claimant counts? That I'm assuming that's in occupations.
Yeah, I'll be in the occupation overview, so we can go to that report. So if we look at this particular example, staying with, I think it's kitchen and catering assistants. We spoke before about maybe changing the area to Greater Manchester, because that's one of the areas affected, or with a high concentration of those staff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Manchester's renowned for its hospitality. So yeah, significant amount of jobs.
Yeah, so kitchen and catering assistants for those the Greater Manchester area. Click on proprietors as well.
So if we go down here, obviously we can see again headline figures there, some very positive looking projections as to what will happen. And we are, yes, there are, it'd be interesting to see how that changes as new data sets potentially get included. We'll be looking into that as we go into autumn. Obviously, you can look at the regional breakdown in terms of jobs, job posting overview, which we looked at on the previous report, gender breakdown, and national age breakdown, which is useful for when considering skills needs. And then you've got Job Centre Plus claimant counts, which are looking pretty low because we're up to February 2020. And as I said, I don't think the March figures as they come out, basically we're going to have to be waiting until the middle of May before we can really start to see the impact of this in regards to claimant counts. Obviously, there's a further complication there in that many staff have also been furloughed. So we don't know with the furloughing scheme whether those jobs are going to still be there at the time that lockdown measures are eased up. And then finally at the bottom you can see which industries are employing kitchen and catering assistants, obviously restaurants, other catering services and so on and so forth, but then you've got primary education and hospital activities as well. Some of those are more likely to be secure. I'd imagine the primary education, the hospital activities are probably to some extent in a safer place than restaurants. We just wanted to point out really where you can go to for the claimant counts data. We will be having a look at where else to include that within the tool, and obviously you can group occupations together and look at them in much in aggregate essentially. So in terms of staying with occupations, it'd be useful to just have a quick look at the way in which we can look at what occupations are compatible with others.
Sorry.
Or we can look at input-output scenario.
Sorry.
That's all right.
So yeah, if you expand the detail of the occupation overview, this little tab here which toggles like so, you can see a bit more detail about the actual occupation in terms of the descriptors, but also the related ONET occupations here in terms of the knowledge and skills, which you can use for compatible occupation analysis. So if I click on that.
So ONET is essentially an American skills taxonomy. So it's a way of looking at the skills required for each occupation. We use this when we were doing, or when we have done our analysis on automation. But essentially what it does is we've mapped ONET across to 4-digit SOC codes, so we can look at the skills and tasks that are involved within each occupation, and that allows us to find occupations that are similar. So obviously you get an overview in regards to the occupation at the top there. We're still looking at kitchen and catering assistants, and then we're looking at compatible occupations. And obviously we're bringing in other data there as well in regards to the number of jobs, the median wages, and the compatibility index you can see over there on the right hand side. That's out of a maximum of 100. And you can see waiters and waitresses, butchers are there. But then you can also see shelf fillers, and we obviously know that supermarkets are doing fairly well at the moment, retail cashiers and checkout operators. Obviously this is just one example, but it should give you an idea of how you might be able to provide information out there for your local area in regards to where there may be immediate opportunities with it, or very quickly opportunities within the labour market that people that have been made unemployed could move into. One of the challenges with this crisis is going to be that the timescale really for employers to be able to find people with the right skills. And obviously we all know that when we've applied, been unemployed, or when we've applied for jobs, that whole process takes a fair bit of time. And obviously you're going to have people that have been displaced within the workforce, and they're going to have to find new opportunities quite quickly. And that might cause some disruption in itself, because people will take jobs and then potentially move to another job that's more suited. So they may take a job in the immediate just to keep the wolves from the door, so to speak. When we go down to the bottom here, there's two things that we can see. Obviously, we've looked at the compatible occupations, but then it breaks down the importance of particular knowledge and skills. Now, this isn't based on job postings, which is obviously where we often draw some of our skills demand from in terms of understanding employer demand, but this is in terms of the knowledge and skills that are required for this occupation based on the ONET skills taxonomy. And then that's importance, I believe it again is out of 100, and obviously those are ranked, and then you can pivot between or flick between knowledge and also skills, and there you can see, so literacy, numeracy, active listening, critical thinking, those are the type of skills that are required for that role and to the extent to which they're required, and that all informs the compatibility or the matching. There's an interesting piece on our blog that Andy Derman, our managing director, has written, I think in the last week, and that's looking at skills transfer. So do have a look at our blog if you want to further understand that, and that goes through some more examples and some more details, but this is the essentially this is the methodology that's been used to inform that. So I think we're going to have a look now at the input-output model. Now, just to say, we can and will do a whole webinar on the input-output scenario planning, and I'll talk a bit more about that as we get towards the end of the webinar. Essentially, what we're looking at here, though, is a model that is a proprietary model that MZ own. It's a mathematical representation of the economic relationship among industries in a particular region. So there's a particular focus on how much each industry purchases from surrounding industries and the effect that has on the wider economy at a local level. So what we're going to do here is we're going to run again a scenario. We're going to assume probably not unrealistically, a 20% decline in two particular industries in terms of jobs, which is beverage serving activities, restaurants and mobile food service activities. So sticking with the pubs, restaurants and cafes that we know have been affected. So we've run that, and then what you've got over here is we're looking at aggregate changes using the MZ model. And then you can see the immediate impact there in terms of wages, with over 2 billion, which is obviously significant. You'll see there's a multiplier there of 1.41. So that's part of that mathematical model, is that there's a multiplier that calculates what the impact is in regards to wages. If we expand on the change in wages, we'll be able to look at that in a bit more detail. Okay, I'm just going to explain this in a bit more detail. So the dark green box is the initial impact, which obviously is taking away 147 million pounds. The initial impact or the initial effect doesn't allow for ripple effects. So this is the immediate effect of taking those jobs out of the labour market. And then obviously you've got the next box, which is the 33 million, which is represented by the kind of aqua green color I'm going to go for. But that's a direct effect. So that shows the sales change in the industry's immediate supply chain. So these would be all the people that are supplying pubs, cafes, restaurants, and obviously if those jobs disappear, there's going to be less demand for the product. Obviously the job loss will result in businesses closing as well. So this is the first round of impacts in the input-output model. Then we've got indirect, which is the grey-blue colour, 14 million. Indirect is the ripple effect to the further supply chain. So those people in the immediate supply chain will also be making less purchases from their supply chains. So this is really the knock-on effect or the ripple effect. Simple terms, this shows the sales change in the supply chains of the supply chain. So it's the second round of impacts. And then you've got the induced effect. This is what a colleague of mine used to refer to as the Tesco's effect. This is the change brought about by the fact that there's less the impact of earnings created by the initial direct and indirect changes, and obviously the fact that those earnings are reduced has a knock-on effect in terms of what people's spending habits are in the regional local economy. Hope that all makes sense. Like I said, there's a lot more that we can do with this, and we will be exploring that in our next webinar. But I thought it's useful just to be able to point you in the direction of this, assuming that you have access to the Analyst tool or to make you aware of it. Just below, Martin, do you want to talk us through what we're looking at here?
Yeah, you can expand a bit more detail as to the effectively what are the ripple effects across the economy. So you can see in terms of the occupations that we're modelling there, the initial impact in accommodation and food services. But the decrease in those jobs will have impacts on other sectors as well. So you can see that retail is also primarily affected, and some other industries also. So this really expands the idea of understanding the ripple effects across the economy. You can quantify that to some extent at the higher industry level.
This is a one-digit SIC level, is that right? It is, I'm sure it is. Okay, so I think we're going to go. I just ignored my my dog's barking, and I'm assuming everyone else did as well, and just carried on regardless. But yes, so I just to recap, I mean, we'll go back to the presentation now. There's a few more things to share, but what we've looked at here is we've looked at job postings. We've looked at those daily job postings, and over the last 30 days. Really useful for understanding the initial impact. We've looked at where you can find claimant counts, which is going to be very important going forward. We've looked at compatible occupations by looking at the ONET skills taxonomy. And then we've also had a quick look, but we will go into more detail at a later stage in regards to how you can run scenarios to understand the wider impact in terms of potential job losses at a local level and the impact that has on the wider economy, and obviously the distribution of jobs as well. Just going to check whether we've got any questions. Debbie, have we got any questions?
Well, we have one question about the cost of Analyst, but obviously that depends on the applicability of all the different parts of the tool. So
yeah, we can pick up that conversation elsewhere. It is dependent on essentially what your needs are and the organisation and so on and so forth. So we'll pick up the conversation about that.
Great. Okay, thanks. And that's the only question. Thanks, Will.
Okay. If anyone does have questions afterwards, obviously I'll be sharing the slides, and if you've got questions and want to come back to me on those, just send across an email once you've got the slides. So we're going to look at what else we can share, or we are sharing. We've got lots of free to access resources. I've talked about some of these, so I won't spend ages on this. Our website is well worth visiting. We have regular blog posts. We've had a few this week, one looking at where we are a month into shutdown, and really starting to look at whether we move from that daily analysis to looking more at monthly and the bigger picture. There's also the other blog post I mentioned looking at skills transferability, which I'd recommend having a read of, because that's really useful in terms of understanding how parts of the workforce that have been disrupted could be redeployed. And then there's also the report, which I think I'll send across to all attendees, because I think it's relevant to what we've discussed today, which looks at the potential effects of shutting down restaurants, cafes and pubs. So I'll share that. Then going on to the next slide.
Well, if I can just interrupt quickly, just had a question came up about the input and output. Can you calculate the effects of the input and output impacts on local businesses? Is that something that analysts can do?
We can, in terms of we can't do it in terms of a named employer. We can understand the impact in terms of supply chain analysis. And what I would suggest is we will be, as I've mentioned on the next webinar, we'll be going into that in more detail. So I'll take that question
Sure.
and we'll explore it further in our next webinar.
Great, okay. And also, just another thing is with the data, we did have a question about whether it goes down to district level. Well, I presume from that it's local authorities.
Absolutely,
So
it goes down to local authority level, LAU1. And obviously you can build that up into your LEP geography or your regional geography and so on and so forth.
That's fab, that's great. Sorry to interrupt.
That's fine, it's great. Just wanted to mention a few things that we've also got. We've got research reports, again, available for the website. Analyst we've talked about today. And then obviously we do bespoke consulting projects as well, which we've talked about. So yes, I think that we've covered all of that. Right, some light relief. I didn't realize it's going to come out quite so blurry. I thought this was funny, but that might just be me. I know that it amused some of our colleagues, although we did make the comment that we probably spend quite a bit of time looking at exponential graphs prior to this period. But it is interesting seeing how data is being used to inform our understanding of this crisis, and it's interesting in itself seeing ONS become a household name. So yes, I just thought I'd share that. Then moving on, I think I've trailed this already. Our next webinar will be on the 20th of May. This will be looking at how to quantify the effects of the current crisis on job losses and impact on industries in your local economy. We'll be exploring what can be done with our input-output model, but what else can be put around that as well. Duncan Brown, our senior economist, will be joining us for that. Do sign up. I know that that's live on the website for people to register. Everyone that's, I should always say this, but anyone that's not able to attend on the day will still receive a recording. Obviously, you don't get to engage with it in quite the same way, but yes, it's worth pointing out. Debbie,
Yes. Conference. Well, it's been postponed from May, as you probably all know, and it's now in October. So hopefully we will be holding the conference in Birmingham. Looks like to be a really exciting, especially with all that's been going on, it's going to be a really important conference, because talking about transferable skills and the talent that's out there and how all this is changing. So yeah, that's on our website. So under MC Conference, under resources. So if you'd like to attend, please book a place and then we can hopefully see you there. So thank you for that, Will.
Yeah, all fingers crossed for that one. So thank you. I did say we had quite a lot to squeeze in. I appreciate you staying with us. We ran slightly over our 30-minute time scale. Do register for the next webinar where we'll be looking more at how to quantify the local impact, and do stay in contact with us and do use our free and available resources. Thanks all.
Thanks. Bye-bye.